Good evening, everyone. I invite you to put on your cameras if you're able and go into gallery view. It's been a while since I taught a Zoom class, and it's kind of nice to be back as opposed to hybrid where I only see half of the people. It's nice to see everybody. It also worked well because I am home with the bug or the flu or something like that. So I'm glad I can teach from my kitchen. And we'll go for about 45 or 50 minutes this evening, just fighting a cold. So let's begin with a heart tap. And great to see you. I want to thank Emily for being behind the Temple Beth Elohim, or the M. And she's going to help coordinate this evening as people come in to the room. Passover is quickly approaching. And what I would like to begin with is your willingness to jump into a chat room 2 different times. The first one, and they're both intentional and related to what we'll be discussing this evening. One is our first chat room. You'll share your name, how long you've been a member of TB or connected to TB, and what you most enjoy about Passover. All right, what you most enjoy about Passover. And then the second chat room will be about what concerns you about this Passover or what brings you to the call. Because the intention of our session is how do we address the current situation at our Passover Seder this year, if at all. And so I want to begin with a chat room. Emily, let's do groups of 5, just in case we have a few multitaskers who opt out of the exercise, but hopefully not. So we'll do groups of 5, and we'll give it about 6 minutes. How about Emily? Which means you have to kind of be your clock so that everyone can go. But your name, and let's begin with what you most enjoy about the Passover Seder or the Passover holiday. Each take a minute, and then we'll come back and we'll set up the second group. All right? Groups of 5, Emily, for 6 minutes. Go join.
Enjoy.
Emily, how much longer do we have?
3 minutes, 2.5 minutes.
Alrighty. About 1 more minute, Emily.
Yep, we'll give them till 7:09, though it looks like 1 or 2 groups might be coming back.
Alrighty. All right, if you joined us a little late, people should be coming back from a group chat. Are we waiting for any more rooms to come through?
Yes, there are a few still chatting.
All right, give them the zap.
Yep, they have 15 seconds before it closes automatically.
All right, we'll transport them into our room. All right, here they come back. Great. All right, we're back together again. We've grown to about 60 people. So this will be a little challenging, but we're going to try it. If you can use your hand signal, either raise your hand or the little reaction at the bottom. And that way I'll see you and call on you to unmute. And we'll just take a few responses. So the question to be shared was, what do you most enjoy about the Seder or the Passover holiday? And I'd love to hear a few voices. So what do we have? What do you most enjoy about the Seder or the Passover holiday? Elaine, Pastor, I see you on my first page.
Okay. I would say, obviously, family coming together, but also the tradition of it, and passing that tradition on to our children and our children's children.
It's a family coming together. Let's remember that one, as opposed to family coming apart, and tradition. So let's hear more. What do you most enjoy about the Passover Seder or the holiday? Any hands? I'm going to go to my second page. Carol Greenberg. Oh, you need to unmute. Let's see if we can do it for you. Ask to unmute. Let's see, Emily, how do we do this? I'm out of shape.
Ask to unmute was the right thing. Looks like she's got it.
Okay. As I said, I love the ritual. I love the Haggadah, the memories of my own celebrating in my family, the tradition of continuing, getting together with family, the significance of generation to generation. And I love the cooking. And as I mentioned, making my grandmother's gefilte fish, which continues the harosis, the matzah farfel, and then cooking with my daughter and grandchildren. And and also the meaning of Passover.
Beautiful. All right, we're going to reward Jerry Goldberg for using the hand raise icon.
I love the whole notion of the Seder. I love the food, the fact that our family comes together, but most of all, I love the fact that my son leads the service.
Nice. Erwin and Sheila. Oh, we got to unmute.
Got it.
There
It's
we go.
so Jewish to take a holiday celebrating something that happened thousands of years ago and use it to talk about today. Since, as you have said before, we're all perpetually in Egypt about something, our job, our family, our health, whatever. And I think it just says something about the Jewish faith and people that we can combine the past and the present in that way.
Great. Thank you. So I'm going to stop us there, but I'm going to invite each person this year at the Seder to state their intention up front, especially if you're hosting, which is what is your goal? It's good to do every year. What is your hope for the Seder evening? Is it family sharing? Is it enjoying good food? Is it focusing on the meaning of the day? We all come with different goals and hopes and joys and memories. And I think it's really important that we state up front what we hope for as we gather around the Seder table. Just as you might say, how long is your Seder, or how the dinner is going to work? I think it's really helpful to frame your intentions in terms of the meaning of the moments. Now let's go to our second group of chats. We're going to cut it to 5 minutes, 5 people. I forget what this was named. Can we talk politics at the Seder or not? So our second chat room is, what are your concerns this year? Is this year different than all other years, to paraphrase the Haggadah? And because we are at a polarizing time, I'm not just talking about Gaza, Iran, Israel. I'm talking about, we have a domestic election coming up. We have one of the leaders, a candidate, on trial. We can come up with a lot of reasons that our world is very polarized. And so our second chat room, and then we're going to dig in. So Emily, groups of 5 minutes. If you're concerned about something at your Passover Seder beyond the brisket burning, we'll share those things. All righty, 5 minutes. How we doing, Emily?
It is time to bring them back.
All right.
I think we actually did 6 minutes.
Can we transport them?
Yep, everybody's on their way.
Great. Excellence. We're still populating. Looks like about 4 more groups need to return. Emily, just say when they're all back.
Okay, looks like one room still.
All right.
There's everybody.
Perfect. All right. I asked the question, what makes this year different than all other years? Or are there things that you are uniquely concerned about this year? Would anyone like to raise their hand and share? As I look through the crowd. I can't see if these are hand. Don Shepard, is that a hand up or a hand blocking the camera? Emily, is there a way to help people unmute?
I'm sorry, I'm muted there. So I
There
was
we-
reminded of the Passover story where dripping the blood to reminded that the people in the Pharaoh's army who drowned were also humans, and to empathy for them. And so I think on both the Israelis who were murdered October 7th and the 20,000 plus Gaza residents who've been killed subsequently, they're both people, and to teach us to be empathetic on both sides. I think
So
it's
is that a
important lesson.
concern? Is that a concern or that's just a share?
I think more sharing and sort of
Great.
something to remember. I think to share.
Rabbi Douglas, good to see ya.
Hi. I first thought that when you said, or we're talking about politics, that you meant domestic politics, and I said, no politics.
Yeah.
And because I don't think about talking about Israel, talking about October 7th, talking about Gaza, is politics. I think that is very much what the modern version of what Passover is all about. I mean, I can't even imagine those hostages in Gaza.
Mhm.
So I think that that part of it is entirely appropriate to talk
What
about.
makes something, if I can just ask you, although I want to kind of hold it and we'll get there, but just to understand, how are you defining politics?
Mm.
That makes domestic issues politics, but maybe foreign policy not? Or is it about Jewish stuff or the land of Israel? What's appropriate and what's not appropriate at your table?
Israel's appropriate. The current situation there is appropriate. October 7th is appropriate.
But Donald Trump is not.
Correct.
Mm.
Or Joe
All
Biden. Or Joe Biden. Domestic
Right.
politics is not. Right.
All right, let's keep going. Concerns about this year. Anyone else?
Nancy Schwartz.
Nancy Schwartz, thank you, host.
I think the differing views, even though we're, like you said, okay, keep domestic politics out, but when you talk about Israel, there's still going to be domestic political views involved.
Yes, so what is the concern, you think, if you had to share one?
Maybe that I have a couple people with extreme differing views in our family.
Mhm.
Mm.
and
Thanks.
and don't want any arguing at the table, you know?
So that is a big word, arguing. So most people don't fear what I would consider a healthy discussion about immigration at the dinner table, or a healthy discussion about low-income housing. But they fear anger at the family table. So I want to try to understand what moves us from a conversation that is appropriate. We read in the book of Proverbs, iron sharpens iron. We should challenge ourselves. The Seder is built around questions. At the same time, it doesn't say get angry at each other and shout at each other across the table. And when you welcome Elijah into your house, someone runs out screaming, I am mad at you. I never want to talk to you again. That is not the idea of Passover. So with that, Jay, Mary, any thoughts?
Well, I tend to agree with you, but I would go one step further. Why should we be fearful of bringing up discourse and conversation and opinions on pretty much anything that happens to come up, and make every effort to have a civil, calm conversation, knowing that we are limited at how we can't control other people completely. We can try to provide a civil and calm environment, but you can only do so much to, with people you're around in any circumstance. And shouldn't we practice trying to be civil and trying to be good listeners and hear different opinions, and even opinions that we disagree with, by not getting angry? It seems like we all need to practice that.
That is for sure. And yet we continue to live in the world where we see less and less of that. And not only are we seeing less of it on television and in public discourse, but we're seeing it within families as well. And I am seeing it more and more in our congregation. People divided over the 2016 election. Families torn apart over the Capitol uprising. Families that are not speaking because of October 7th and Israeli policy. So how do we foster, at a time of family gathering that is meant to nurture a thoughtful discourse, exactly that, when so much of our culture is running counter to that, even within our families? Thoughts? Let's see, as I go through, I'm on page 3. Any thoughts? How do we foster what Jay just described? Margie, Nesson. Nope, we're having problems with the unmuting for some reason.
Is to talk
There.
about at the very beginning. What is our goal of tonight? Our goal is, continuing a tradition, long established tradition. And by doing that, we could possibly think really hard about, maybe we won't get into the current situation, because that possibly can take away from the true meaning of the Seder.
Mm-hmm. So I am going to add to Margie, as a rabbi, that you know your family best. If they cannot do what Jay described, it's probably not the time to test it. It is if you know you have 4 people that were even hesitant to come because they're so angry at people's political stances, and you think you can foster a political discussion, it's probably not a great idea. It's probably not worth it. And I will say you have still met the mitzvah of observing the Seder without having an open argument about something critically important, but your family's just not able to do it at this moment. And the only one that can really judge that is you. But as I meet with temple members, there are families that are just not prepared to do this, especially this year. And then there are families who are fully able to do it.
I was just suggesting making a statement that let's not go there.
Right. So you're saying, let's not do it. Now, there's a reason for not doing it, I would think. And I would think it's because you think that it's not worth it, that certain topics are not worth engaging in at the Seder, as opposed to just having a loose, people can share whatever they share. There are some families where everyone actually agrees. It actually makes for a less interesting conversation in some ways, but the odds of arguing are pretty slim as well. So there's this delicate balance that the Seder provides of learning through difference, but not arguing and shouting, which seems to be what we often see, not just on television, but for our college students, especially on social media. There's very little conversation, but there's a lot of shouting. And so growing up in a world of shouting is pretty significant. In addition, many psychologists have commented that COVID has set some people back in terms of encountering others. There are many reasons why play is less structured. We don't encounter others in the same way. Another thing is the algorithms of the internet. We're more likely to be visited by things that agree with us than things that challenge us on a daily basis. And we're expected to agree with them. So when we look at Netflix pretty much knows what we like, and they show us what we like. And that's true of a lot of the internet that we encounter. So for a lot of reasons, we're no longer as adept at dealing with challenge, especially generationally, some studies have shown. Now, I don't want to say it's unique to a specific generation. We know that. I'm sure we can point out an uncle or an aunt or whoever in our Seders of old or our Seders of today who just like to stir this pot a little too much. But you know your family's best. Other thoughts of, what's the difference between civil conversation and angry conversation? Because I think it's less about what topics we can discuss, but it's how we can discuss them. And can we? Nancy Schwartz.
I think it's when it becomes personal, when people say you instead of I, and keeping it about your own feelings versus attacking others.
When it becomes a personal attack is really critical. Rather speak about the issue and ultimately the value, I think most importantly, that you hold so dear that might actually be shared by the person you're arguing with. Let's keep going. Carolyn Ringel.
I have 3 very opinionated, vocal children, which is great sometimes, mostly. But we try really hard to enforce no interrupting. So let someone finish a thought. Try to be, I'm not that I'm keeping track of how many times each person speaks, but try not to let any one person monopolize the conversation. And I usually serve as moderator, and like at a certain point, you just have to, it's not helpful to keep going and sort of cut it off sounds more abrupt, but at a certain point, sort of gently say, okay, I think all opinions have been voiced. We've all sort of gotten to say what we want to say. Whoever has been open to changing a mind has been changed, but at a certain point, like the horse has been beaten, and let's move on.
So a self-appointed or an appointed moderator can be a very valuable asset around the table, and hopefully there is one in those instances, but there may not be one. So something to consider, but I love that suggestion where one person can weigh in. Victoria.
So one of the things that I think lets you know whether you're having an argument or having a discussion is really focusing on what's the goal. And if people are sharing their viewpoint because they're interested in sharing it with someone and interested in listening to someone else's viewpoint, but the goal isn't to change somebody's stance. And when people kind of enter the conversation in a right-wrong framework and the goal of making somebody else believe what they do, I think you're pretty much headed to an argument, because most people aren't going to change their mind and admit to changing their mind over the Seder. So, but, really framing it so people can just have that discussion that's not goal-oriented, beyond learning and understanding each other better.
Excellent. If the goal is learning, that's very different than advocacy. And many people don't come to learn, but they come to advocate. And that is not what the Seder is about. So if we can facilitate real learning, which is challenging to do, it's a pretty extraordinary thing. And I want to suggest some questions later this evening that can facilitate learning. Unfortunately, they don't address some of the difficult topics because they assume that on the most difficult topics of our day, largely around the future of our country or the future of Israel, it moves too closely into advocacy, which is an interesting thing. Let's take a couple more. Harriet?
I have an issue with a 15-year-old granddaughter who's bat mitzvahed. Her sister's being bat mitzvahed next weekend, not this weekend. And so when I was there from Ohio, when we were there, we started to get into a discussion, and she said to me, "I'm for the Palestinians, let's not talk about it." And so how do you blame a child you brought up? I didn't bring up, I helped to by bringing up her father, that they believe in humanitarian things. You worry about people, they don't know enough history. It's a very dicey situation. And then trying to be respectful, she cuts me off. And so her mother was just sitting there listening. And I thought, whoa, so I won't see her until the end of Passover. So how do we handle it?
So there's a lot to unpack in that question that we can't focus on specifically, but I think one of the most important things you shared was she said, let's not talk about it. So I'm curious what that means. You might want to ask her why. So it's not about politics. There's obviously something in the family system that she's addressing.
Well, she's on the debating team at school, and she was a couple times the lead in the play. So she's a strong young lady.
Exactly. You would think she would say, I'm a strong debater. I have a strong opinion. Let's talk about it. But she specifically said, let's not talk about it, which makes me think that's room for an interesting conversation. It might get you might need a therapist in the room as the moderator, and you might choose to save that conversation for family therapy, who knows? But these are the types of things that I think are just landmines for what can be a beautiful family tradition. So I'm reminded of the movie Avalon. If anyone saw that movie years ago, of a big fight on Thanksgiving when someone shows up late to Suburban Brother, and it becomes what was intended to this beautiful family gathering, this family war, and how quickly it can be transformed. And I do think without some of the suggestions people have made, starting with an intention, maybe having a moderator, having some set of ground rules of hopes and expectations, making sure discussions are not personal attacks. I mean, I think we need to remind ourselves how to have civil conversations before jumping into them, knowing the emotions of this moment. Erwin. Oh, the mute.
Right. Remembering what the holiday is about, Jews walking to freedom, to be free and to have control over their own destiny. You can find a way to go part way. You can talk about, do you agree that Jews have a right to live freely and without fear? Forget where, who, with, what, do you agree with that? And once you agree with that, maybe we should just talk about aiding CJP, aiding organizations that help the ordinary Jew, whether they're Israeli or American, to live a better life. You can have your views on Palestine, you can have your views on everything else, and we can disagree. But aren't we all at least together that the Jews who've been mistreated through history should have a chance to not be mistreated. And then some other day we'll talk about how we get there.
So thank you, Erwin. So if I can just paraphrase a little bit, this is the beauty of being the moderator, like at the Seder. But unlike your Seder, I can mute people. So I think it's really important to focus on the shared values around the table. Even people who disagree on issues usually share values. It's just the way they want to get to those values may be very different. But if you can focus on the shared values, which ultimately is what the Seder's about, that's the most important thing. And one of the most important values that we share as a Jewish community is peace within the home and the family. And so if that value is at risk for the sake of a really deep, thoughtful conversation about Ukraine, I would suggest tabling the deep, thoughtful conversation that is really upsetting to people. Now, in truth, Ukraine is a little less personal for most of us, unless you're from Ukraine. But it might be about Israel this year, or it might be about domestic politics. I think things that hit so close to personhood might jeopardize the value of Shalom Bayit, peace in the home. But only you know that. Only you know that. Ultimately, we want to articulate our values up front. So if family is a value, which I hope it is, I hope you'll articulate that by beginning with, I am so grateful that we're all here together. You could even say, and at this time when we hold different opinions, I'm just so grateful that we are here to share a meal together and catch up on each other's lives. That might be appropriate for some families. For other families, it's, hey, it's great. I want to hear what everyone thinks about the Middle East right now. But it's something to think about prior to the Seder. Amy, Goran.
So I'm a little less concerned about the arguing. I think we've got that under control. What I'm really interested in is sort of making sure that the words that we're reading in the Haggadah are landed in the context of a post-October 7th world. And given I also have outspoken children who well, I'm not going to go into the whole Israel as an ethno-state thing, but it's there. I'm really concerned and looking for guidance on interpreting the Haggadah and having the story and the words land appropriately, and not even appropriately, but in the I'm not saying this well, but in the context of the world in which we live. I really appreciated the insert to the Haggadah that you all sent out with the poem in it. I don't want to sweep it under the rug. I want to make mention. I want to focus on the plight of the Palestinians and Israel and the hostages and bring it all together. And I just want to make sure that when we're reading it, we're not feeling as if we're reading something that is so dissonant with where we are in the world today. If that makes any sense.
It makes sense, but I actually think it demands too much of the Seder. And so let me just share a bit. Even if we were to look at the words of the Haggadah, many words are missing. For instance, the plagues took a lot of innocent people. We have no pictures in our Haggadah of the suffering that these people experienced, and we have no narrative of the innocence. We don't know what it was like for innocent Egyptians to deal with the 10 plagues and the death of their firstborn. If we did have those narratives in our Seder, it would feel very different. Do we add those narratives into our Seder? I think it's a very challenging task. And so I think we have to recognize some of the limitations of the Haggadah, in that people are going to bring to the Haggadah what they need, and what they see. It's kind of the inkblot test in many ways. And each year we see it differently. I think the Haggadah is meant to generate questions and not be the authoritative essay. And that's the great challenge. As many inserts as we can provide, it can't do it all. Eventually, the conversation leaves the page. And some families are going to be able to do that well, and some families aren't. And I don't know if there's an answer that can go beyond that, but to limit our expectations of what the Passover Haggadah is there for. It's a very challenging read when the Jewish people go forth to freedom at the expense of innocent people. Now, in the Haggadah, the rabbis minimize some of that pain by introducing a deep sense of compassion and empathy. So, for instance, no rejoicing over the death of the innocent, removing drops of blood. And that's why many of the readings this year suggesting don't take one drop of blood after each plague, but take out 2 drops of blood, to recognize that our sorrow is not just an ancient sorrow of innocent Egyptians, but it's a modern sorrow. That on our way to what might be considered existential freedom and redemption from war, innocents are being lost. But I'm not sure any reading is going to really do that for people. I'd love to hear some responses. It's a challenge, what Amy just provided. Thoughts?
I think that what you just said, the 2 drops of blood, even things like that, I find are very helpful. And it's that kind of thing that I've been looking for.
Great. So thank you. What we want to emphasize, what I have found is that empathy and compassion, to hold empathy and compassion with existential security, are the 2 things that we as Jews in this moment have to hold. And we have to dial up the empathy more than we've ever done before, for a variety of reasons. I learned this when I spoke to the local churches in town. As many of you know, the last few months I've spoken at a number of the churches. And I learned very quickly that they couldn't hear a thing that I was going to say without my expressing empathy for the death of innocent civilians. But I didn't need to express empathy in the beginning. I needed to express it in the middle and the ends and several times in between. And even with that, it was very hard because it is so painful to see innocents suffer. And the Haggadah certainly is that story of innocents suffer for the sake of a people to go forth to freedom when they're existentially threatened by an enemy, in this case, Pharaoh, or we read Amalek in the Haggadah. It's very easy to say, Hamas is Pharaoh. But I think these comparisons become too simple. And I think we just need a very nuanced read this year and dial up the empathy with the readings we've provided. Other thoughts? So with that, let me do a screen share. There are 2 ways, I think, to do this, depending on your family. One is as Amy shared. Can you see this? There is a link on our website. And we have provided a number of readings. This one Jordy shared in her sermon last Friday, Rabbi Kalman, to be used at the 10 plagues, really describing through drops of wine the empathy for all those who suffer. And there are a number of reasons that there are a number of readings that I think can be really helpful. If you think your family can handle addressing, there we go, let's mute. If you think your family with the moderator or with the intention can address this topic and explore empathy together. If not, I think you also have the option of saying, maybe for Shalom Bayit, recognizing the variety of opinions around the room, this is not the year. And there are, for instance, a number of questions at the Passover Seder. Can you see this? Can you see these questions?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Which do not address politics, but facilitate learning. When speaking about Jewish identity in Egypt, what does Jewish identity mean? Well, that's even a richer one, I think. Let's see. I just wrote these down. What is your personal Mitzrayim, your narrow place? What is holding you back the most? Are there signs in our life pushing us to change that we are just refusing to see? Are there signs around us that God exists? What are they? What are the ingredients to be a great leader? If you knew for certain that God would help you succeed, even through miracles, what new endeavor would you take on? What have you done recently to step out of your comfort zone with the Red Sea? So you get the idea. This is to say, there's a lot to talk about that's not politics around the table that can be really rich. And I think it's completely fair to say, my goal is Shalom Bayit, peace in the home. I want to learn, I want to explore the values. The middle ground is to actually have a conversation where people disagree, but can gravitate towards the shared values and not have personal attacks. So someone who, well, I don't even want to give examples. I think you understand what I mean. Marion J?
Yes, just one comment as you've been talking. I suspect many, many people in this group and perhaps other people feel this is useful. Would it be helpful or useful to have a debriefing in a week or two from now with this group or others to share our good or not so good experiences at the Passover?
That would be
something to think about.
Well,
But it might be very helpful.
Email me, and if I get enough responses, I will definitely facilitate that. I think what we are seeing is the Haggadah and the narrative is a really important one, obviously. We are the possessors of an incredible tradition that we sit at a table with a family and tell an ancient story over and over again. Are things missing from that history that would make it more accurate? Yes. But it is a time for a family to gather around, to explore, learn, and embrace their Jewish identity and the values we hold dear, and use the Haggadah as a jumping off point. I think what makes this increasingly challenging is the time and the place in which we live. And the issues were always there. There were always disagreements. It's how we resolve them these days. It may have been easier when people lived closer together, generations lived in the same home, or in some of your families, I'm sure you can tell me stories where it was just harder. It's really dependent, but it seems to me that I have never received so many phone calls and emails from members of our synagogue. It started in 2016, but ever since October 7th, it's gone up exponentially in a very hard way for some families, where families are being torn apart. They were being torn apart by domestic issues within the congregation, but it's nothing like it is since October 7th. Hopefully that doesn't describe your family, But if it does, I just want to say you're not alone. And my goal for tonight was, if you fall within that category, know that you don't need to take a knife and twist it into the heart. Meaning, if you know that a conversation is going to lead to a great divide, I would actually name that and articulate your intentions and focus on the values you share. So with that, let me just see if there's a voice or two, and then it's almost 8 o'clock. Anyone? Elaine and Jerry, last two comments?
Yeah, Joel, you've talked a lot about empathy at the Seder. I also want to emphasize there are a lot of us that have children at the Seders, and some of the things that we've talked about tonight are really more geared toward adults and young people. So I think we need to really prepare ourselves to answer questions for children and to explain each of the steps in the Seder. One of the resources I found that's really terrific is SaturdayNightSeder.com. It's all one word, SaturdayNightSeder.com. It's fun. But I do have one funny part. We tend to explain everything. We have several non-Jewish people who attend our Seders, and we explained everything. And at the end, one of the people raised her hand and she said, "You've explained the significance of everything, but what's the significance of the Jell-O?"
Love it. I can come up with some ideas. Elaine, Pastor.
Okay, so I'm sitting here with a dilemma after this evening, because we have been doing our Seder, which Joey and I host, for probably 50 years. And it's been done pretty much the same way, with the same, all the things that our kids have made at Jewish Day School are displayed, like a gallery, and it's everything is done exactly the same way year after year after year. And when Joey does a part of the Seder and leaves out something, the kids are very quick to say, "Wait, hold it, you forgot such and such." So on the other hand, I liked the idea of adding different aspects, but I wonder how well that's going to be received when we'll be breaking tradition. And as I said earlier, the traditional part of the Seder is what I always feel so proud of.
This is a
And
great,
so,
this is a great place to end, because it's where we began, which is what you love most about your Seder. So if you love most food and family and tradition, I think it's very appropriate to begin by saying, I love the Seder because of food and family and tradition. And part of the tradition is we've been doing the same thing for 50 years. And that's what I'd like us to do this evening. Meaning we're not going to do everything. And that's okay. It's not an escape. It's actually a very intention preservation of what you've created over 50 years. Another family might be, our tradition is to argue about current politics or Israel passionately. And that's okay too, if that's what they look forward to each year. But I think in your case, the way you've described it, I would hope that you can maintain the traditions you've created for over 50 years. And it's not time to let the current day politics intervene in what's been a very special moment in the life of your family. So if anything, this evening was really to give each person permission to start to think through what's best for your family. Each one of us has a different answer. And to say, really, it might not be the time to take the risk even. You know your family. Some people are more risk takers, but if you have a tradition that's been in your family for a long time, I would just name it, because there's value in maintaining the tradition that has served you well. When it no longer serves you well, you'll know, and then you'll want to change it yourself. So with that, I just want to say happy Passover, everybody. Chag Sameach. email me, let me know how it goes, and I hope your families grow together in love and compassion. Bye-bye.
Thank you.